Have you ever needed God to come through for you in a really big way? I was about 3 months into owning my own business. I had opened a private counseling practice. It felt like the Lord had released me from my job and told me that this was the next step. And I was believing and trusting in that. And 3 months in, I was not making money. And I was barely able to make ends meet. Like everything was going on a credit card. What I was bringing in was just enough to cover rent and nothing else. And I remember feeling incredibly frustrated with God. Like, this was the plan. I prayed, I waited. I had been in a really toxic work environment for a pretty long time and just waiting, and had not felt like the Lord had released me from that for many, many months, and had just been sticking it out and persevering and seeing what God was teaching me through that. And then all of a sudden he did. And he said, yep, it's time to go. At that point, I wasn't really ready to go yet, because though it was toxic, there were things that I still felt like needed to be accomplished. And God said, nope, it's time. And so I did. I took that step of faith. I opened my own business. I was excited. And then it wasn't working the way I thought it was going to work. I was sitting in my apartment, and I had written my rent check and I wrote my tithe check. And those two numbers added up to be more than what was in my bank account. Going, okay, God, you're going to have to make this work. And I knew that God would be faithful. I knew that God would provide, because I had built my faith. I had exercised my faith. But in that moment, I didn't know how he was going to provide. And I didn't want to bounce my checks. I knew that I was supposed to be tithing as a way to honor God, to trust God in every aspect of your life. I think I've talked about that a handful of times on this channel before, of trusting God in every area of your life. So I wrote my rent check, I wrote my tithe check. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I went to prayer night that night. Our church does a once a month prayer night. And that particular night, our pastor had said, if you feel like you need God to show up in physical health or in finances in your life, to raise your hand for prayer. And so I raised my hand, and people came around me and prayed over my situation, though I didn't speak out what my specific situation was. I just said that I needed prayer for finances. At the end of the night, one of the women who had prayed for me came up and said, well, do you feel like you got some answers? Do you feel like you got breakthrough tonight? And I was like, well, yeah, kind of. Like, I know that I'm supposed to just keep the course. I believe that God will provide. I don't necessarily know how that's going to happen, but I'm believing that God will provide. You know, I was being obedient. I had taken these steps. I wasn't being foolish with my money. I wasn't being foolish with my decisions. I was walking in the path that God had me. And I remember she looked at me, and without knowing anything about my situation, she said, would it help you if I wrote you a check tonight for $1,000? I was speechless. It was one of those moments where I had heard about God coming through like that for other people. Never believed that would happen for me. Interesting, because we can have enough faith to believe that God would be miraculous in general, but sometimes we lack faith for our own circumstances and our own situation. My response was, well, yeah. She said, like, this is no strings attached. This is one sister to another. God has blessed me with extra money, and I didn't know how I was supposed to use it, and I know today that I'm supposed to use it for you. I left that night being in awe of who God is, that he would care enough about me to provide in such an overwhelming way. I mean, this wasn't like, well, what's the difference of those two checks? Let me write you that balance. This wasn't $100. This was $1,000. When God shows up, when he wants to make himself known in your life, he shows up. It's important to know, to remember that we don't give to get. We aren't obedient so that God cares so much more about the condition of our heart. I was not tithing that day expecting that God would provide this woman to give me a bunch of money. I was writing the tithe check that day believing that God is who he says he is, that he says he will provide. Now, there are many times in my life when God provides and God shows up in a way I would never expect, like that night. Did I have any plan that that's what was going to happen? Did I even know that we were going to be praying over finances? No. Faith is believing that God is who he says he is. That no matter what, he will care for you. Now again, he could have shown up in a lot of different ways. I could have still struggled financially, and I did continue to struggle financially. All right, that check covered that and several more months, but it didn't increase my income. So it wasn't like all of a sudden my circumstances completely changed and money was falling from the sky every moment. No, I had to continue to walk in faith. Whatever circumstance you are walking through today, know that God cares. God may not show up in the way that you expect or in the way that you are wanting. We can't be obedient so that God will do something. It's not a transactional relationship. I've heard people say, well, but I've been obedient and I've been doing this and I've been tithing or I've been doing whatever God is asking me to do and it's not working. Well, again, it's not a transactional relationship. And if you view it as that, you're not going to get from the relationship what you're hoping for. Because what God wants is relationship with us, intimacy with us. Wherever you find yourself, seek God first. Don't seek an outcome. If we focus on a specific outcome, we miss the power of God, what God is doing in your life. Don't miss what God wants to do, what God wants to teach you, and how God wants to show up for you. Because you're too focused on a specific outcome.